Bob Jolly, Athenaeum Director. I am a famously known mumbler, so I am trying to speak articulately, and I can take my mask off now, which would make my voice worse. Did an introduction to a program a couple of weeks ago, which was just this one I will make to you. Good time to turn off your phone. For today, this very special occasion, use the bathroom in the children's room. The elevator will not come up from the basement floor. I had said something like that, and a person in the audience said, "Could you repeat everything?" It made me paranoid about how much of a mumbler I am. It didn't seem fair. So, thank you for coming. It's been very nice to do some Sunday programs. It's not something we normally do here at the Athenaeum. It's been a real change. Glad you are here. And the turnout has been good enough that we'll probably do some next year. So mark your calendars. September in 2024, if you're not doing anything else. Let me introduce Sid. Sidney Lee was Poet Laureate of Vermont from 2011 to 2015. In 2021, he received Vermont's highest artistic distinction, the Governor's Award for Excellence in the Arts, and we were all home. So hardly anybody knew that. And so, congratulations. It's overdue. In 2022, he published Seen from All Sides, Lyric and Everyday Life, a collection of newspaper columns on poetry composed during his laureate tenure. A third edition of Roads Taken, Contemporary Vermont Poets, an anthology he co-edited with Chard Denord, his successor as state poet, is now available. We have all three of those books, so if you're wanting to see if you want to see anybody who's anybody in Vermont poetry, I think if they put two words together and they could identify those people, they're in there. They are great collections of who is who of Vermont poets. His 16th collection of poems, What Shines, is here now. It'll be available for purchase and signing after the event. In early 2024, his collection of personal essays, Such Dancing as I Can, will appear. And later in the year, his second novel, Now Look. So go ahead and feel guilty about being lazy. Here is Sidney Lee.
Thank you so much, Bob. Yeah, the timing of my prize was unfortunate, but I'm glad to have it acknowledged here. Thank you. My last book came out a little bit before that, which was another instance of excellent timing. I'm really grateful for you to have come to begin with, and second of all, to oblige my request that you mask, which is principally motivated by the fact that my wife and I are going to fly to Slovenia in a few days, a country with which, for reasons I won't trouble you with, I have a long literary relationship, and my longtime translator there, and a man who's become a great friend of mine, has health issues which are more than precarious, so we're being as careful as we possibly can, not so much for our own sakes as for his. So I want to thank you, Bob. It's wonderful that you have these readings, and I'm very grateful that you tolerate my coming every time I scribble something. So I've got no long poems for a change in my situation. So there are baker's dozen or so, which I will read, and you can't stop me. Well, I suppose you could. The first, it's I've always had an inclination to the retrospective for some time in my poetry, but you turn 80 and that impulse becomes well, shall we say, more pronounced. Sort of hear the footsteps on the porch. Hang on here, I got one more thing to say. So there, some of these poems go way, way back, including this one called 1949. In the photograph, they're both grinning straight at the Kodak, an elm not blighted yet to death at their backs. It's years since either parent was on hand. How did it happen? I'm past 79. We live our lives, Psalm 90 says, as a tale that is told. From where I stand, that's all too real. What startles me is that the tale's so short, an instant, it seems, from this moment back to its start. With what I've known, you'd think there'd be chapter on chapter. 5 children, all those grandsons, those granddaughters. And I could go on and on about each one, but on and on's no longer what it's been. I have another photo on my dresser. My mother, alone in that one, standing by water that sluggishly sighs by our cabin in Sydnea. I don't know how to explain why I can't be found in the shot. After all, the bucket at her feet is full of sunfish I've plucked from that very creek. Or is it? Like anyone else, I tell myself stories. Maybe my claim's no more than imaginary, which makes it, for me at least, not a bit less true. The fish are green and orange. Their lips are blue. I feel the heat that caroms off streamside boulders. I can whiff the swamp nearby where algae molder. Who dwells in our old house these days? Search me. Whose room was mine? Who recalls the ghost elm tree? The grass in the meadow's likely gone brown as ever. No pumpkin seed in the pail still gasps or quivers. Who visits the cabin? Who hooks small fish in the water? My mother stands there beaming beside my treasures. I shouldn't be, and yet I'm somehow stunned. Even the fish in that yellow photo are young. Not too long after that year that I recall in that poem, my parents, or rather my grandmother was a classical music appreciator. It helped her to sleep clearly, as it did either at home or at the Symphony Hall, we discovered. But she bought what was called then, things quaint now, a hi-fi, high fidelity system, which compared to the old, what we used to call Victrola, you know, the record player, really seemed to us something extraordinary. She wasn't really all that keen later along when I was playing like Little Richard and Fats Domino on it, but she didn't sleep through that. At any rate, this remembers when it was played the first time. Hi-fi. I think both little sisters were still too young for school. We brothers not many years older. I suspect that what I say is more than a bit sentimental and may not have a basis in anything real back then. So be it, but let me keep it. The 5 of us hearing that tune, the strings and horns so alive. It's good to be where we are near our parents' new hi-fi, which spills into every corner. The fidelity, almost shocking. They've told us about its wonders, and now at last they own one. Having adjusted some knob, they stand stone still for a moment, as if in a sort of trance. Of course, they're both long gone, so of course they no longer dance, cheeks touching or anyhow. But as long as I say so, they do. Indeed, the song I hear now is precisely cheek to cheek. Now, why would it talk about swimming in a river or a creek? Or maybe it's actually fishing. Who cares? Strange bliss pours forth as long as the record keeps spinning. Sickness, regret, and death will all arrive in time. And some rancor, I won't forget it, This evening, however, we brothers and sisters watch, enchanted, 5 children together on the couch with the fancy lace, while our faithful parents glide in what looks like a fond embrace. The title poem of this book, What Shines, not on the cover, but on the poem itself has a question mark after it. My mother was really quite a remarkable woman in many ways, who unfortunately battled, alas, not terribly successfully, with addiction to alcohol, and it made life complex at home. And yet, I mean, there's a lot of her constant exhortation that I should apply yourself. I've internalized that, and I'm not a good vacationer for the first few days for that reason, that I'm not accomplishing anything. But if I had not had that admonition, it's pretty hard to imagine that I wouldn't have just kept on being a witless adolescent American male interested in hockey and contraband beer and creatures of the opposite sex. So I do owe her something. But this poem looks back on to see what shines out of all that. What shines? It's for my sister Jane, who at one point said, when does it get to be your fault? It was a sobering question to ask me. What shines? Astonishing, this never-ending effort to have had a happy childhood. What does it matter now? Why will yourself into all that forgetting? She may have been a good mother, at least you tried. Or did she? Once again, you're the one that's trying. You contend you do remember moments that glow. You picture her standing one day in the snow, her teeth in the chatter, no doubt, and yet she looked quite cheerful. Or she seemed to be trying, as you are. The teeth, at least, were one good feature, radiant to the end. You were poised at the top of a hill on a flexible flyer, red sled that shone, your Christmas present at 9. It may have brought you joy. You're trying to alter the downslope rush to make it shiny too, to blot out the icicles of snot, the raw fingers, chilblains, pain. A father was there, a good man, who's now no more than a specter, whose presence is no more advantageous than on that day. Or was it of some avail? You can't remember. You honestly can't remember. Perhaps you just don't want to. You're doing well. At least you're trying with this, your obstinate bid to sweep off misfortune, to see if there's anything more than only sorrow. Well, there were certain instances. You say, I remember stones. You say, I saw a beach by moonlight. And did those pebbles glint like stars, as you insist? You yearn to be sure clouds never came to eclipse them. You keep on trying. There's that pervasive gleam along the shore. Then you take a step, and suddenly there's nothing. I admitted the other night at the Norwich bookstore that last line was stolen actually from the great Edith Wharton. It's the end of one of her Roman tales, which I highly recommend. She's better known for other things, of course, but that's a wonderful collection. Okay, this will be the last childhood. Oh, the hell with it. I get enough of that. I always like to say I'm really lots of fun in real life, so let's move along. This poem is called Partners and Partners, as in, old John Wayne odors, Partners and Partners. It's not so all fair bright either, is it? Well, we'll see. Partners and Partners. In the pre-op room, my wife was given a scalene block for a brief procedure. She had shoulder surgery 3 months back, and now again they'll anesthetize her to break up scars that have kept her in pain. She'll be comatose, however, briefly. I remembered right off how one's love can seldom appear so precious as on a gurney. I feel, sorry, the book took off of me, okay. I remember right off how one's love can seldom appear so precious as on a gurney. I feel what I felt on watching her labor to give birth to our children, but I won't be on hand for this episode. I sit in the lobby alone except for one other old man in a black cowboy hat who's waiting like me for a wife to come too. He's plunging his fingers into her purse and digs around inside. In search of what, I wonder? I can't decode his half-audible mumbles or his face's expression. On the trip here from home, we hit black ice on a busy road in this busy small town. My pickup spun on the slick in what passes for rush hour here. The fact we weren't hurt defies all reason. The man keeps probing, and I keep wondering why. His look's still deadpan. I know very well what it is to divert one's thoughts from hurtful or frightening matters, to seek what can lift us out of the world when it threatens to tear itself to tatters. How on earth can love torture us so? Its pain seems deepened by the length of its years. An ambulance siren winds down outside. I've been reading to keep myself busy, but now I look up to find my cowpoke in tears. Suspension. Season of the strawberry moon, the Algonquins call it. The berries ripen in June. We see them along what's left of ancient tote roads. Some say rose moon, some say hot. We won't be, but if we were forced to forage, those shy red baubles wouldn't start to stifle our hunger. If solitude can be shared, we share it here in our cabin, deep in the woods. Don't ask where it is. There are gullible perch in the lake, another damp duff in the forest, small worms for bait. We own a stable rowboat. Rain dripped all day from the eaves, then blue broke through, exactly on time for Moon to delete it. Our crackly portable radio says, fair tomorrow. Hot but pleasant. More good fortune. What did we do to deserve this? In the jagged row at our clearing's edge, wild roses glow like gemstones splayed on felt. Mere minutes before the darkness yields to moonlight too, and they go wan. We noticed a damselfly drying its wings in late afternoon on a wall beneath the eaves. It lifted just at dusk to hover briefly over its tiny world, as we do over ours. Next poem describes, we're all familiar with it. This is actually a little town in Maine, but there are all kinds of them all over the kingdom. I think you may recognize what I'm getting at here. It's called Upcountry Detour. An old man sluggishly waves a hand. He looks spellbound as if by an apparition. A stranger, me, in a place few ever visit. I'm sidetracked into my own odd spell, both sadness at bleakness and fascination. There's a sign in another dooryard, bizarre, a Trini, world's finest files. A softball arcs on the blistered common, a father pitching, a son at bat. One new car, a Dodge Charger, glitters like gemstone in front of a postage stamp store. Back lots full of witchgrass show unwheeled pickups, dead amid whips of the lilac and sumac. I drive out of town past further signs. Becky, Trucker's Heaven, 1 mile. Come in and have a cup with Beck. Becky's, closed for renovation. Its windows bordered over with wains, in brush beside it, a bed spring, a dryer. I notice a black cat eyeing a bird on its roof, too high for him to consider. We have a bird brain cardinal. I suppose that's the tautology of it. The male cardinal seems every spring to come to this one window and fight with his reflection just over and over and over again. We've tried all manner of deterrents, but he's pretty relentless. And I decided in a moment, I don't know what, to write this poem called Omen. Loud wing beats at the window snap me out of the torpor of my minor springtime sorrow. A blast of desire, not wholly carnal, not wholly not, suddenly overcomes me. I'm almost 80 and love-struck. What can that have to do with the cardinal's frenzied attack on his likeness there in the pane? Bright bird, I see that you're jealous. Of what? You're at it again, enraged. Small wonder you're scarlet. Listen, you're only alone. Alone, and somehow I feel it. A futile bird brain ardor brings me a premonition. My love's in the bedroom, dear reader, and I picture my world's perdition. Come on, cheer up here. I don't pick these things, and I don't give enough thought to the mood in general. I think if you send everybody out of here with a hangdog expression. Well, I'll just push ahead, and you'll have to forgive me. The next poem is called November 1st, and it makes reference to a poem by the great and troubled jazz pianist Bill Evans called Waltz for Debbie. November 1st, forlorn. It's as though the word had just been there, lurking within the calendar's paper, waiting for me to turn October over. In the instant, I hear a perfect interior version, as played by Bill Evans, who wrote it, of Waltz for Debbie. Paul Motion brushes his snare, subtle, near silent. That pair of opening, falling fifths spawns melancholy all by itself. I really ought to refrain from admitting cliche to the page, how my youthful flamboyance long since surrendered to age, how my years have made me patriarch of our clan, how the oak's mahogany leaves have replaced their naked maples verve, and the usual rest. But platitude's all it deserves, such facile dejection for one who should count himself favored, nearing the end of a life that numberless souls would crave, so much of it seeming happy accident. Things might have been so different in any season in my little world. How dare I so much as imagine desolation? A chickadee cheeps in the forest. However implausibly I can make something of it. The bird's no nightingale, and I'll still hail him, as ever grandiose, bookishly clever. Forlorn, the very word is like a bell that told me back from thee to my soul self. And yet there's so much more than self to consider. Debbie, Musa Incognita, for instance, performing her waltz, heedless of my existence. The quotations that I tried to read as cornily as I could are, of course, from Keats's Ode to a Nightingale. Chickadee, nightingale. I had an interesting experience with a nightingale. I went to this wonderful villa on Lake Como, owned by the Rockefeller Foundation, and at the little beautiful little town of Bellagio. And I lived in a manner to which I was not accustomed. There were 12 of us and I think 40 staff. So if you could manage to get out of your clothes and get into bed at night, then the rest was pretty much taken care of. They'd be washed in the morning and the bed would be made and what have you. And so when I first arrived, my wife and I had both been poisoned by bad oysters for a couple days before, so it was a trying journey. When I got there the first night, I began to feel exhausted but better. And lo and behold, there I was in my room, which had been inhabited at one point for a spell by John Kennedy. Nightingale flew into the ivy below the windows and began to sing, and I drifted off to sleep thinking, you know, what I do to get so lucky? Not the first time I've had that thought. By the end of the third night, I was filling up this wastebasket with water and pouring it down. I think the goddamn thing was keeping me awake all night. So I have a mixed relations with nightingales. This poem is called Shadows. It's in memory of my brother who died way too young of a brain aneurysm. The shade our tamarack throws grows paler every day, just as its needles do. Odd and evergreen that's not. How can you be 40 years dead? Each last needle will soon have fallen. I look up from writing this, and it's muddled my perception, as though I had something in my eyes, almost like a needle tube. Those eyes against my will go blurry again. The rain's a subtle drum on every tree in the forest, but I focus on the one. I've gotten so fond of it. It stood apart for most of my life. 4 decades the world has been without you now. That single tree is spilling itself on the ground. In mine, the shadow of its canopy will live on, even after it's gone. Mythology. Another sappy love poem. You'll have to bear with us. You can, if you want. Mythology. My wife is my best critic, and one of the things that she does, we have a little shorthand, like, New Age sensitive guy, the snag, sensitive New Age guy, I know you better than that, you better cut that out, But this is nonetheless is a little heartfelt testimony. Mythology. That I had to stay out of the pond for half an hour after I ate. That my grandmother selflessly rolled dressings for Yanks who'd been wounded in World War II. That her uniform hung in our parents' theater closet, but somehow disappeared. Yeah, perhaps there were thugs in masks who grabbed it in a lamp. Oh, sure. I invented my own little myth as a boy 6 decades back and more. That if I thought hard enough about her in the shower, a girl would appear by magic and she'd adore me. The spray from the head, the very ichor of Eros. It never happened. I never thought hard enough, perhaps, or couldn't picture which girl I wanted, which has changed. That whoever threw the first punch in a fight would always win. I have scars to disprove that claim. That marriage went dull, its physical fervors quashed by the passage of time. It depends on whom you're paired with, I testify. I wear 2 wedding rings, the first for day 1, the other for 15 years, and I'll soon need another for 40. If this is a trap, don't set me free. Such sentiment was hardly the point, if indeed there was one when I began. Ah, well, all's well, said the fabulous bard, that ends well, as I've found, like a wondrous myth, like a fairy tale. I went through a period of, the pandemic affected us all in different ways. I wonder what it was like for people with really contentious marriages. Right? It just, a vision of the afterlife in advance somehow. Fortunately, we get along most of the time and enjoy each other's company. But, we weren't out and about, didn't see many other people, stuck pretty much at home, and looking around for things to write about, and I came up with, I think the wonderful poet Katie Moritz here was my student, one of my favorite students ever. She took a course with me, and I never assigned exercises. I sort of don't believe in those. I mean, I'm fine with exercises as long as they're your own. And so the one I came up with quite arbitrarily was I would read just any old thing, and I would write down 10 words from it that caught my attention. Then I'd put it aside, and then I'd try and write the poem whereby I could connect all those words. And I had an assumption that I could find a story that would connect them. And this is one of them called Disappearances, and I can't even remember what the words were. Wrapped, an old man inspects his living room mirror, but not for his image. Instead, its angle subtly reflects the light of a stub of a candle on the silent piano. He might say the reflection shimmers, but the years, though blessed, have jaded him some. He'd rather avoid such a hackneyed word, but he's also abandoned the urge to think up a better. A train comes to mind, though he doesn't know why. He can't recall when it was he saw it, or even if. But it seems some caboose's lantern lodged in his mind a lifetime ago, its glow growing distant. Was it even then a matter of things he longed for fading? The rattle and click on the tracks made a poignant song. He'd rather ignore its meaning, clearer now than ever. Oh, just a couple more. Maybe just one more. This one is called Compensation, and it also remembers I and my 4 siblings were raised and lived in my grandmother's house, big old rambling house that she had been born in, and so had my mother. And it had an old sun porch on it that had a stand-up piano on which my brother and I took lessons in vain, but then he took up the French horn and I the clarinet, and we had a very strong sibling rivalry, and I just remember having these, anything, we could turn anything into a weapon. So he would stand there just blaring at me with his French horn, and I sit back at him. But at any rate, that was her place to go paint, because it faced north, and she was an amateur painter, and not a very good one. I think she knew that, but we never asked her, needless to say. This poem is called Compensation, the Apple Pickers. As ever, she steadied the paper with her left hand, the right one wielding a nub of charcoal. This time she worked on a sketch for what would become her painting of 11th hour apple pickers. No, later, too late. But she wanted November. Frost on grass, ghost white, fragile as silence, against which her fingers would be stationed. The pillow of leaves below the tree, umber, gray. Subtle shades she rightly considered a challenge. Everything challenged her. because, and she likely knew it, the brute fact was she painted poorly. And thus her grandchildren all believed it a marvel, after the sketch gave way to canvas and oils, that the picture proved brilliant, as if it were crossed by magic. It implied unseen things, for instance. Crows, which showed nowhere in what she produced, could still be heard nearby and raucous outside the frame. And we caught the scent of windfall fruit, or rather I did, as I never told my siblings for fear of being taunted. All of us loved her and laughed at her too. We'd spy on her as she studied the easel on her sun porch, biting her lip, shaking her head, then dabbing again at the palette, lost in thought, no doubt. May our laughs to be forgiven. We are ignorant, not callous. Like her, if only once in our lifetimes, may we be gifted with something that transports us beyond mere chronological measure, as she was by her one good painting, which compensated her for ongoing griefs, losing a son to the flu epidemic, and then soon after losing her husband. The Apple Pickers seems to have been her stingy muse's gift, not just for her valor, but for her persistence, for simply putting in time. Thank you. I can't remember if you do Q&A kind of things, but I'm happy to do it, but you don't have to
Question?
feel obliged.
Would you like to?
Sir.
Go for you.
And I might have the phrase, but in one of your essays, you're out duck hunting in a blind, and you're perfectly happy just watching what's going on. You know, and your dog would like to be more active and involved in the hunt, but you keep telling him, no, you know, we're here for something else. And you kind of muse about, well, maybe I should have given it to this guy and just like sold it to him because he would have been a real hunter dog. Like that. But you have this, I don't know if it's incidental grace or it's incidental something that you remark at towards the end of that essay.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought a lot of your poems tonight call about, you know, there's an incidental quality about them, that your wonder or your puzzlement about something generates a poem,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it collects a certain incidental quality.
Mm-hmm.
These things come along for the ride, so,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Well, I think that's right. It's a statement with which I agree. I won't contradict it. I think there's much to be said for your evaluation. I don't ever know where a poem is going when I begin it. You know, and I'm sure my friend Tim Mayo, another poet, and Katie, a poet, I'm sure, so I say, but I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that, you know, the joy of putting this stuff together is to start playing around with the language and seeing where it takes you. Particularly what kinds of odd connections you may make. You know, stub of a candle summons a caboose which may or may not have been there in your past, and that's just one example. Or you know, I start writing about a photograph of my mom standing with a bucket of fish at her feet, and where's that going to go, and what's it going to be about? You know, I don't ever start with an idea. You know, a lot of the really beginning poets, like undergrads who are just starting to write, they'll come up and say, you know, I just didn't have any ideas. It's said, I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, that somebody once came up to W.H. Auden and said, "Oh, sir, I have a marvelous idea for a poem." And he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that." Because I think too often, and I don't exempt myself, I was an English teacher too, in addition to a so-called creative writing teacher, that we can treat poems too often as a sort of criticism in reverse, where, you know, you peel away all the poetic effects so you can get at the content. But the poetic effects you know, it's a musical form. I call it lyric because it was originally, you know, accompanied by a lyre. And because I used to play reed instruments, I always kind of picture it as a column of air coming up and rattling around on my vocal cords and seeing what comes out, hoping that it's not too dissonant. But it's all a matter of inquiry and seeing what incidentals amount to, just paying attention to them and applying the right language if you
I
can.
mean, just in your prose, I mean, there's a lot going on. I think, and you often you're very reflective about incidental things that are happening when you're present to, you know, this landscape. And I think that's what's intriguing about it.
Huh.
You know, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of writing. It's kind of like,
Well, I hope
there's
not.
complexity to it.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. Otherwise, it could all be reduced. My friend Bill Matthews, the late friend Bill Matthews, you know, like, so why you can describe your poetry in a line from the Teddy Bear's Picnic. I said, well, if you go down to the woods today, you're in for a big surprise. I hope it was an affectionate barb. I think it was. Anything else? Anybody else? Well, thank you again.